All right, so today we're diving into some pretty wild stuff, right? Like,
Okay.
what is intelligence? Kind of wild.
Yeah, no kidding. We're tackling Dr. Michael Levin's work, and this guy is making waves, let me tell you.
Big time. And we're focusing on diverse intelligence, which is, well, exactly what it sounds like, the idea that we humans might not have the monopoly on thinking that we tend to assume we do.
It's a real shake-up, challenging how we see ourselves in the world around us.
Totally. So we're digging into Levin's latest blog post where he gets into some of the reactions he's gotten to his work. And spoiler alert, people have some strong feelings about this stuff.
Oh, yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? You'd think we'd be used to having our worldview challenged by now, but Levin seems to really strike a nerve.
He does. And part of that, I think, is that deep down, a lot of us like to think humans are special. We've got these big brains, we build spaceships, we make art. It's easy to fall into that we're at the top kind of thinking.
Right, like intelligence is this hierarchy, and humans are sitting pretty at the tippy top.
Exactly. But Levin comes along and says, hold on a sec, what even IS intelligence? And suddenly that whole pyramid structure starts to look a little shaky.
For sure. So, for those who are new to Levin's work, he's a biologist, but not your typical lab coat type. This isn't just about dissecting frogs or whatever. He's looking at the big picture of how life organizes itself, how systems interact and process information.
And he's saying those systems, they might be way more complex than we give them credit for. Like maybe intelligence isn't about having a human brain, but about how any living thing is put together and how it interacts with its environment.
That's the gist, yeah. He calls it organicism, this idea that intelligence emerges not just from your genes, but from the way the whole system hangs together. So, like, your body is made of trillions of cells, right?
Mhm.
Each one doing its own little thing.
Right.
But they're not just acting randomly, are they? They're working together in this crazy, complex dance to keep you alive. Levin's saying that coordination, that communication between the parts, that could be a form of intelligence itself, just not one we're used to thinking about.
So it's not just about the brain, it's about how everything works together. Like my liver is having a board meeting with my kidneys right now.
Well, maybe not a board meeting, haha, but there's definitely some complex communication happening. And here's where things get really interesting, right? Levin's research suggests this kind of intelligence might not be limited to what we traditionally think of as living things.
Okay, now we're getting to the good stuff. So we're talking what, plants, bacteria, rocks.
Well, he's done experiments with slime molds, which are these weird single-celled organisms that can solve mazes and stuff.
Yeah.
Even engineered tissues, like grown in a lab, show signs of this kind of intelligence. It's like they're processing information and making decisions, but in a way we're just beginning to grasp.
And that's where people start to get a little freaked out, right? Freaked out is a good way to put it. Because if we're being honest, the idea that intelligence might be way more widespread than we thought, well, it kind of messes with our sense of importance, doesn't it?
100%. And Levin talks about that head on in his blog post. He's encountered a lot of, well, let's call it resistance to his work. And not just from your typical skeptics. Even some people who are into broader ideas of consciousness, they get a little twitchy when he starts talking about diverse intelligence.
Really? That's so interesting because you figure they'd be on board with this whole questioning the status quo thing. Why the pushback even from them?
It's like he's poked a bruise we didn't even know we had. See, a lot of us, even if we don't want to admit it, kind of like feeling special.
Mm.
We're the top dogs, right? The only ones with the brain power to really think and feel and all that jazz.
We're taught that in school, practically.
Yeah.
Humans. The pinnacle of evolution.
Exactly. So along comes Levin and says, hey, maybe intelligence isn't this exclusive club. And some folks, even the ones who think they're open-minded, they start to worry. Like, wait a minute, if my dog has some kind of mind, even if it's not writing poetry, then what makes me so different?
It's like that whole thing, right? If everyone's special, then no one is.
That's exactly it. Levin calls it a scarcity mindset. Like there's only so much intelligence to go around, and if we start acknowledging it in other beings, well, it's like our own piece of the pie gets smaller.
I can see how that'd be unsettling. It's almost an existential crisis. If we're not the center of the universe, then what are we?
Right. And Levin quotes someone in his post who sums it up perfectly. They said, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, if too many other things are intelligent, then my own intelligence isn't worth as much.
Ouch. That's kind of a sad way to look at it, if you ask me.
It is sad, but it's also incredibly honest. And I think it reveals how deeply ingrained this need to be special really is.
So how do we move past that? Because honestly, this scarcity mindset, it doesn't sound very healthy, does it?
Not really, no.
Yeah.
And Levin would agree with you there. He'd say it's not about shrinking our definition of intelligence. It's about expanding our understanding of what it can even be.
So instead of seeing it as a threat, we need to see it as an opportunity.
Exactly. It's like looking at the night sky. For centuries, we thought there were only a few thousand stars, right? And then telescopes got better, and suddenly we realized there are billions, trillions of them. Did that make the stars we already knew about any less amazing?
Of course not. If anything, it just made the universe even more mind-blowing.
Precisely. And that's what Levin's getting at with diverse intelligence. It's not about diminishing our own intelligence. It's about recognizing that there are other ways of experiencing and interacting with the world that are just as valid, just as valuable as our own. And who knows what incredible things we might discover when we open ourselves up to that possibility.
I like that. It's about expanding our perspective instead of letting our egos get in the way.
100%. And, it's funny because we do this all the time, even within our own species. We talk about different types of intelligence, right? Like you can be a musical genius but struggle with math, or be a whiz at social situations but not so great at expressing yourself creatively.
Right, we all have our strengths.
And we recognize those as different forms of intelligence, even though they look different from each other. So maybe expanding that to include the intelligence of a forest or a slime mold, it's not as crazy as it sounds at first.
Okay, I'm starting to see where Levin's coming from. But he doesn't stop at just expanding our definition of intelligence, does he?
Nope. He takes it a step further and says this: recognizing diverse intelligence isn't just a scientific endeavor, it's an ethical and even spiritual one.
Oh, okay, now we're getting into some really deep waters here. So how does compassion fit into all of this?
Well, think about it this way. If we acknowledge that a tree, for instance, might be sensing the world in its own way, even if it's not thinking like a human, would that change how we treat that tree?
Maybe. I mean, I definitely wouldn't look at a tree the same way. But ethically, spiritually, I'm not sure I'm following. I mean, I'm all for treating trees with respect, but I'm not sure I'm ready to start inviting them to dinner parties or anything.
Uh-huh. No, I hear you. It's not about, like, giving trees voting rights or anything, but it's about recognizing that our actions have an impact on other beings, even if we don't fully understand their experience of the world.
Okay, I'm starting to see what you mean. Like maybe it's less about treating everything like it's human and more about expanding our circle of compassion to include, well, everything.
Exactly. And that's where things start to get really interesting because Levin argues that this isn't just about how we treat the world around us. It's about engineering yourself.
Engineering ourselves. Okay, now you're going to have to explain that one. Are we talking cyborgs now? Microchips in our brains.
Not quite.
Mm-hmm.
Levin's talking about something much more profound. He's talking about consciously expanding your own capacity for compassion, for understanding. It's about asking yourself, how big can I make my circle of concern?
That's a pretty powerful question. And how do we actually go about doing that? Like, are there exercises for expanding your compassion muscles?
Well, Levin talks about what he calls the cognitive light cone. Imagine a beam of light spreading out from a point, right? That's your awareness. Everything inside that cone is what you're aware of, what you care about.
Okay, I'm visualizing it. Go on.
So Levin challenges us to widen that cone, to include more beings, more experiences, even those that seem completely alien to us, to really try to understand and empathize with experiences that are different from our own.
So it's about stretching our perspective, getting out of our own heads and trying to see the world through other eyes. Eyes that might belong to a bat or a mushroom or even a robot, potentially.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that our way of seeing things isn't the only way, and it might not even be the best way.
So we're back to that idea of humility again, aren't we? Remembering that we don't have all the answers.
Humility is a big part of it, for sure. But it's also about curiosity, I think. Approaching the unknown with a sense of wonder and excitement instead of fear and judgment.
And that curiosity, that willingness to expand our understanding of intelligence, it could lead us to some pretty amazing places, couldn't it?
Absolutely. It could revolutionize how we design technology, how we interact with the environment, even how we approach problems in our own lives.
So where do we go from here? What's the takeaway for someone listening to this deep dive who's thinking, okay, this diverse intelligence stuff is blowing my mind, but what am I supposed to do with it?
I think the first step is simply to be open to the possibility, open to the idea that the world is far more complex and interconnected than we often realize. And maybe, just maybe, we're not the only ones having a conversation around here.
I love that. And on that note, I want to thank you and all of you listening for joining us on this deep dive into the mind-bending world of Dr. Michael Levin and diverse intelligence. It's a conversation that challenges us to rethink some of our most fundamental assumptions about the world. And I don't know about you, but I'm feeling pretty energized by that.
Me too. It's a conversation worth having, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And if you want to dive deeper into this stuff, you can find links to Dr. Levin's work on our website. Until next time, keep asking those big questions and keep your minds open to the incredible possibilities that exist all around us.